Please be seated. It's this odd phrase. As we've been journeying through these phrases, these sayings of Jesus from the cross, and seeing his heart and this moment, this incredible, horrible moment of pain and agony, there's this phrase. And I must have read past it 100 times, thinking perhaps it's just of little consequence. But John wrote it. And John would tell us at the end of his gospel that he says, listen, there is so much that Jesus said and did that if we were to write it all down, I suppose that not all the books in all the world could contain all of it. But John wrote this phrase. In John 19, verse 28, it starts saying, later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so Scripture would be fulfilled. Jesus said, I thirst. We're familiar, many of us, when we come to Good Friday. We're familiar, at least cerebrally, we understand the pain and the physical torment that Jesus went through. And we don't need to belabor that and go into the gory detail, except to simply say, perhaps, the ancient Jewish historian Josephus called it the most wretched of deaths. His contemporary, Cicero, a Roman historian, called it the most cruel and terrible penalty. A man in physical agony, tormented of heart and soul. And from that place, he says, I thirst. The physical experience of thirst is something that when we truly experience it, it has a way of cutting through our consciousness. Those who've experienced even moderate dehydration, moving into the place where water becomes desperate, will describe it as an experience that is unchangeable. You can't flip the channel. Your mind is stuck and focused on your thirst. It's a very primal, a very essential part of what humans experience. And I wonder if thirst for Adam and Eve became one of the first things that they noticed east of Eden. One of those first lights on the dashboard of new humanity that said things are not the way they're supposed to be anymore. This physical realization in your body that cries out, you lack. There's something you need, and you do not have it. The body can go almost 2 months without food, but a week, maybe a week and a half without water. Thirst tells us physically there's something you need, there's something you crave, and you don't have it. But we thirst more deeply than just physical thirst. We thirst of soul, we thirst of heart. In John's Gospel, in the 4th chapter, Jesus is sitting with a Samaritan woman. And he engages her by a well in a conversation about thirst that moves from physical to the thirst of the heart and the soul. And he talks to her about her relationships, that she's had 5 husbands, and the man she's now with isn't her husband. And in their culture, a woman had no ability to cause divorce, but she could be rejected by a man. And over again, this woman had been pushed aside. And Jesus says, there's water I can give you where you'll never thirst again. We thirst in similar ways. We thirst from a place of loneliness. We thirst for community, for a people, a place where we might be known and to know, where we would be accepted and loved and embraced. We thirst for intimacy, for companionship, that there might be someone who loves me fully, that I can give myself to, who would walk with me, who would partner with me, to go to those small and secret places. We thirst for purpose, for something that when we rise and we take our first breaths in the morning, it fills our lungs and we are invigorated, and yet many of us feel as though we're just going on, and each breath is a question of, isn't there something more? We thirst for the presence of those we miss. And this is a deep thirst. I have a friend who just last week, he lost his son. 27-year-old young man taken from this world. And we thirst for the presence of the people we long to be with. In a book that he wrote about his own grief and the loss of his son, Nicholas Walterstorff wrote a book called A Lament for My Son, and he describes his grief this way. There's a hole in the world now. In the place where he was, there's now just nothing. A center like no other of memory and hope and knowledge and affection, which once inhabited this earth, it's gone. A perspective on this world, unique to this world, what's once moved about in this world is gone. There's nobody now who saw what he saw, who knows what he knew, who remembers what he remembers, loves what he loved. A person, an irreplaceable person, is gone, and the world is emptier. I remember in the year or so after my father had passed away, and would go through the house and see things that he knew about, that he took with him. I remember finding in one of his drawers this big janitor-sized keychain. And I suppose that he knew what every single one of those keys was for. But he took that information, he took that knowledge with him, and I thirsted for my father. To be with him, to hold him, to ask him about simple things like keys. Brothers and sisters, we're a people that thirst of heart and soul, that thirst deeply. And as Jesus wandered through the pages of the Gospels, we see him coming time and time again to these people who thirst, and they find satisfaction in him. And now Jesus is on the cross saying, I thirst. But perhaps his thirst was even deeper than that. It was a thirst that was first named and recognized in the garden. When God went walking in, he couldn't find them. He couldn't find Adam and Eve, and he called out to them, "Where are you?" They were hiding. They were separate from him, from his presence. It was a thirst that had set the heart of the Father on a mission, where he would call out Abram and he would say to him, "Listen, I will be your God, and you will be my people." And from that, he would journey with the people, and he would actually attain a drop of this thirst with the servant Moses, who he was able to, again, talk to face, as though talking to a friend. And he would preserve this in David, who he allowed to suffer and to be tormented, because he said, his heart needs to thirst for me. One way to understand the story of Scriptures is perhaps to see a father who's thirsty for his family. A father who longs to share his presence with his kids again. a Father who chases them down, who calls after them, who is turning through the pages and the aisles of history in heartless, full pursuit of his family. And then in the scene just before this, Jesus is standing trial, and God's people are before him. And we read in John that when Pilate brought Jesus out and he sat down on the seat known as the stone pavement, he said, "Here is your king." And God's people, the one he longed for, he thirsted for, said, "We have no king but Caesar. I've given you my son because I long for you. But you have no king. You don't thirst for me. You don't thirst for me like I thirst for you." We understand that as Jesus was on the cross, he suffered in his body. And we understand that as Jesus was tormented and humiliated and betrayed, he suffered in his soul. But there's this moment, somewhere between crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and this moment where he cries out, "I thirst," where he suffers in his spirit because the Father has turned away. The one who said, "If you drink of the water I give you, you will never thirst again," thirsts. The one who said, "Those who believe in me," as the scriptures have said, it will be like rivers of living water will flow from them, thirsts. The one who said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied," thirsts. And brothers and sisters, the reason we need to see this, the reason we need to know this, is because if the one who could quench all thirst, the one who could meet every thirst we would ever have, if he is thirsty on the cross, then he has become a different one indeed. Because Jesus didn't just die for you, but when he said, "I thirst," he died as you. Because that's your thirst on the cross. That's your longing of body, of soul, of spirit. There are many wonderful times when as a family we will gather together and we get to talk about hope. And we get to celebrate, and we get to give thanksgiving, and we get to pour out our praise to God, and we stand in victory. But perhaps tonight is a night to thirst. To come to a place of saying, "Jesus, I thirst deeply. I miss the presence of that person I love, and I thirst. I thirst in my body. It's not the way it's supposed to be. I feel so broken, and I thirst. I thirst in my spirit because I long for you, but often I feel so far away, and I wander, and I thirst." Humanity has a track record of taking our thirst in all different places, of chasing our thirst all around the world. And almost always, when we try to satisfy our thirst, it ends up in hurt and heartache and habits and hang-ups and things that ultimately make us more thirsty, that don't quench, that maybe provide a moment of relief, but then we're parched again. But tonight, if you could acknowledge that thirst, say, "Jesus, it's real. And I see the way you loved me by taking my thirst, by thirsting for me, not just dying for me, but dying as me. You can chase your thirst anywhere, but the road ends at the cross. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty.
Thanks for tuning in to a message from the Sanctuary Church. For more information and media, go to our website at thesanctuarywestside.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.